I was shown that God's people, who are His peculiar treasure, cannot engage in this perplexing war, for it is opposed to every principle of their faith. In the army, they cannot obey the truth and at the same time obey the requirements of their officers. There would be a continual violation of conscience.
Anybody else? Yes, Rick.
Because we know through this presentation and other things that these wars, like Pat Tillman's experience, he gives up a portion at least of a pro ball career to go fight a war. These wars are being fought on false pretenses. The people that are going to fight them are not told the truth of what they're doing.
Right.
I look at the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and the numbers I've heard is between 8,000 and 15,000 STAs are in the military. In light of that, could you give us a brief summary of the historic Adventist position on Adventism and military service?
Absolutely, Rick. Up until World War I, Rick, which was America entered it in 1917, but the World War started in 1914. Up to that time, Seventh-day Adventists never, ever took up arms in war. Never. They were always conscientious objectors. But at the start of World War I, some of the European leaders began to push the Seventh-day Adventist denomination to get Seventh-day Adventist young men to do military service and to take up arms. The Adventist Church, tragically, Rick, at that time, sided with the powers of Europe and forced the young Adventist men into military fighting. It was actually, Rick, at that time when the, what do they call the Reformed Seventh-day Adventists, they came into being at that time because there were many young Seventh-day Adventist young men who refused to take up arms in the military during World War I. Because they refused, of course, they were thrown into jail, and the church did not back them. Well, in the ensuing years, Rick, these Seventh-day Adventists, they demanded apology, they demanded repentance of the leadership, not only in Europe, but also in America, because let's face it, the European Adventist leaders got their marching orders from the brethren in Washington. So these men, Rick, demanded of the Adventist leaders apologies, confession. The Adventist leadership did nothing to make things right. It was at that point, Rick, that the Reformed Seventh-day Adventist Church was created. But up until that time again, Seventh-day Adventists never participated in armed combat. Never. And that was the stand that Seventh-day Adventists took.
I was shown that God's people, who are His peculiar treasure, cannot engage in this perplexing war, for it is opposed to every principle of their faith. In the army, they cannot obey the truth and at the same time obey the requirements of their officers. There would be a continual violation of conscience. Worldly men are governed by worldly principles. They can appreciate no other. Worldly policy and public opinion comprise the principle of action that governs them and leads them to practice the form of right doing. But God's people cannot be governed by these motives. The words and commands of God, written in the soul, are spirit and life, and there is power in them to bring into subjection and enforce obedience. The 10 precepts of Jehovah are the foundation of all righteous and good laws. Those who love God's commandments will conform to every good law of the land. But if the requirements of the rulers are such as conflict with the laws of God, the only question to be settled is, shall we obey God or man? In consequence of long-continued and progressive rebellion against the higher constitution and laws, a gloomy pall of darkness and death is spread over the earth. The earth groans under the burden of accumulated guilt, and everywhere dying mortals are compelled to experience the wretchedness included in the wages of unrighteousness. I was shown that men have carried out the purposes of Satan by craft and deceit, and a dreadful blow has recently been given. It can be truly said, justice standeth afar off, for truth is fallen in the street, and equity cannot enter, and he that departeth from evil maketh himself a prey.